Okay, today I want to do part 2 of that political quiz I was doing in the last one. And this time I want to change a couple of things about it. I'll probably want to maybe read the question first, think a little bit, and then answer. I mean, I do like the kind of off-the-cuff thing, but I think we'll still have that. Oh yes, and then there's one more addendum, because a friend of mine mentioned to me that when I was talking about the Federal Agency for Political Education last time, which makes this quiz, I forgot to mention that one of the biggest things and most important things that they publish is a political journal, which is very prestigious. It's called Aus Politik und Zeitgeschichte, which means sort of something like of politics and contemporary history. And yeah, it's very well regarded, and I didn't mention it in the last one because I was more mentioning the stuff that's for a broader audience. But yeah, I mean, a free journal, very prestigious, that's a pretty amazing thing, so I wanted to mention that. Otherwise, I'm also going to look down again. I'm going to probably change up how I'm doing it. So for one, before it was over here. So if you like this content or the last content, you can also subscribe to me, and I'm going to start now. This question is about gender identities, and what it says is, okay, it basically says federal agencies should acknowledge different gender identities in their publications. Okay, so how do you set it up? So first, I guess German is a gendered language. That means that we have 3 different genders. We have a male, a female, and a neutral gender. If you use the language generally, you know a lot more about the gender of the other person from the context. I mean, you might not know it, but it's implied through the words. And so there are a couple of problems with that. This is particularly in like more feminist and progressive circles. They've been pointing out some of the intrinsic gender biases and assumptions within languages. And in German, for example, one thing that is very common is that you just use the masculine form for a word to include everyone, and that's what has been done in publications, in like legal publications, for example, for a long time. So that comes, of course, with a little bit of vagueness. It's kind of like normal to people who hear it in German, but basically, when you use like a plural for a masculine plural for a group, now women don't immediately know whether they're included or not included in this, right? Like it could be, because it could be something that's exclusive for men. So for example, we are looking for, so in German, like we are looking for male programmers. And that's just what the advertisement says. You might not know whether as a woman you're supposed to apply. It might take you a while, you don't know for sure. Of course, this has kind of gotten better in the sense that like this kind of discrimination is not is outlawed, so you're not really allowed to just be like, well, I only want to get men to do this. And also it's very socially frowned upon, I would say. But it's like language-wise, it's still a problem. And especially in publications, it's probably important to be as accurate as possible and to really say who you mean. So that's I think an important thing. So furthermore, this has become kind of a political argument, because the way it's done, so basically there's a couple of different ways. In German we call it gendering, to gender while speaking, basically. And so some people just do like, they include the male and female version and will say like, we are looking for female programmers and male programmers, something like that, right? But then of course, like if you follow the discussions in America as well, that kind of includes a lot of non-binary people. It's kind of still confusing. So one of the ideas that people have been using in Germany is to use what they call a gender star, which is basically an asterisk that is put in the middle of the word to communicate that you mean male identifying, female identifying, every other identifying group of people. You're just inclusive, basically. That's the idea. So you can imagine if you suddenly have like asterisks in writing, that's like a lot of people would kind of be like, this is not how German is written, because a lot of people are very, very tied to like a traditional view of how their language should be spoken and written. Oh man, I'm kind of like, this is a difficult one. Okay, anyway, so this is the first aspect. So in a written language, we have this asterisk to include more people. And now in spoken language, people have started to use a glottal stop, basically like stopping in the middle of the word to simulate this gender star, this asterisk. So for example, if you take the word teachers, that you could, it is always like gendered in traditional German. It's either male teacher or female teacher, so Lehrer or Lehrerin. And now you could of course say Lehrer und Lehrerinnen, which means male teachers and female teachers, but then you're like excluding non-binary teachers. That's kind of the idea behind it. And so in German now some people say, and I think like public broadcasters, although I don't really watch them, often use this glottal stop, which is like Lehrerinnen. So you have like, I think that's how it's done. I've not really done it myself, not really had the need to do that. Okay, so, and this is of course like a real like a culture war kind of issue now, right? Like especially conservatives, like this is really stupid, people hate it. A lot of more like progressive and academic people are like, no, we need to do this is the right thing to do, to include more people and to basically question our intrinsic assumptions about things. And so I guess like in the general population, it's kind of strange, right, to hear it, because that's not what you've been growing up with. And I think like you do have to make like kind of a difference between like, you know, someone who isn't really involved in this kind of academic jargon, not using that. It's not that big of a deal, I think. And like maybe someone who's like much more knowledgeable and being like, you know, actively against it and being like, this is the feminists taking over universities. It's like, and then of course like the next word will be like, it's kind of like the Third Reich. Now you can't even say anymore. You can't even call a man anymore, or something like that. I don't know what people will say. I don't really see these kind of things as strictly, I guess. Where are we? Right. I think like in English it's a little bit different, but like one of the equivalents is like this discussion of Latinx in American, right? Even though there's, I think, a bit of more of a wrinkle there, because I think a lot of Spanish speakers, who are the ones that are supposed to be included, don't like the Latinx thing. I saw some polls where like most Spanish speakers in America apparently don't really know it or know about it, or at least they didn't know about it when the poll was taken. And most of the people who do know it, like they are against it. And I think that makes some sense as a Spanish speaker, because apparently this Latinx is like, it's basically not pronounceable in Spanish. So it's sort of for like people who speak English but want to include Latin Americans. I mean, I think that is a worthy goal. From what I understand, my Spanish isn't nowhere near good enough, is that like there are movements like that in South America and like Spanish-speaking countries generally as well. And like I think what's more popular there is E at the end, like as an inclusive gendered form of the word. So like, you know, I wouldn't know how to pronounce it, but like, you know, you have like Latino, which is male, Latina, which would be female, and then Latine or Latin. I don't know if you would pronounce the E at the end, to have like an exclusive thing. And that's sort of, I mean, that's, I guess, then very similar culture war kind of stuff as in Germany, where like a lot more of the conservative people is like, that's not how Spanish works. And then like, you know, a lot of often like younger people or activists are like, no, we're going to use it all the time. And I guess like, so to talk about like what my thoughts is more, well, I think it's because the question is like, what should official documents say, right? I think like the official documents should be like as inclusive and accurate as possible. And so if I would think it might be a good idea to actually use this kind of language and have like an agreed upon language to use, to say like, well, in this law we only mean men, in this law we only mean women, in this law we only mean non-binary people, and in these laws we mean everyone. You're all included, you know, because it's just sensible for laws to have this kind of accuracy, I think, and also like it doesn't necessarily show a bias of the speakers of the language at the moment, that male is the default and seen as like the incorporating thing, or like for example where in Spanish like the if you learn Spanish, you get taught if there's just one man in a group, it has to be the masculine group noun, basically. And so I don't think that people who use this are sexist, but I think it shows that there was a lot of sexist biases historically that have shaped these kind of assumptions. I've been listening to a very interesting book about the lives of ordinary people in the ancient world, and it talks kind of about that as well, how like the roles of women, things like that, were different, and how the assumptions were basically made about what women could do, what they couldn't do. And I think like language is one of the things where you can see these kind of assumptions a society has. Okay, I mean, I've been rambling a lot about this, and it's probably not super coherent, so I'm gonna say like I mostly agree with this one and go to the next one. All right. Okay, this is another question that's important in Germany. So there is a gas pipeline that is meant to send gas from Russia to, Germany and generally Europe. It's meant to send gas through the Baltic Sea. And now there's like a couple of arguments about this. So what are the lines? Okay, maybe let's start first with the green one, right? So basically people are against gas. They say like, we don't need more gas, we should have less gas. It's a very bad for the environment. This is like a sign of this, and that's why we should oppose it. What's the other side? Okay, so then the other side is like, business interests and Russia, they would be saying like, no, we do actually need this gas pipeline. There's a couple of reasons for why we need it. There has been like theft of gas from countries that the gas has been piped through before. That's particularly Russia is like blaming the Ukraine. Apparently the Ukraine did admit it to some degree, but still this gives obviously Russia a lot more leverage over the Ukraine, and then there's like the issue over Crimea, so like that becomes a more fraught political sideshow, I guess, which like, well, should we give Russia more power over the Ukraine since they're already like kind of fighting a war in that region? Okay. Additionally, like what will be said before is like, well, sure, like now it's gas, but in the future it could be like hydrogen or something like that. It will be like much better, so we really need it. Oh, and then like the last argument for it is like, oh, it's almost 95% done, let's just do the last thing. The last 5%, it's not a big deal, let's just do it. Oh, and then from a political point of view, it's like what a lot of people will say is like, we've made a contract, like how should the government like just stop it when it's done like by private companies anyways, and like it shouldn't be up to us to disrupt this contract for whatever reason, Okay, so that is the side of the pro people. Now there's another, like America does not want this gas pipeline to be built, and the reason for that is, so one reason is, again, they will state like that Russia gets a lot more power because of this, and like we shouldn't connect to a country that is very undemocratic, doesn't treat human rights well. That's the stated reason. And then of course the other reason is that America would like to sell its gas to Europe and make money with that. So that's obviously, from a European perspective, that's not a very convincing argument in the sense like, well, it might be nice for America, but like, why? How is that good for us? Like, we want to be independent from as many people as we can. There probably are a couple more wrinkles that I'm not thinking of right now, but okay. So what do I think? I actually like. I understand that as like a symbol of like climate change. It's not ideal, but on the whole, I think like, sure, like finish building it, and we need to have other policy measures to really limit the use of gas and coal, and maybe it can be used in the future, who knows, or something. But I think it should be allowed to be used. Oh right, maybe I forgot like the one thing that a lot of people are saying is like, so this pipeline is called Nord Stream 2, and the reason is because there's already a Nord Stream 1, and obviously there's pipelines from Russia to Europe, and apparently those aren't actually near full capacity. So like, we don't, like what people on the other side is like, we don't even need this. Like, this is not necessary. But then you come to the point like, well, if it's not necessary, then it's probably also not a problem like climate change wide, right? Because then it's not going to be used. And then I don't know, like there's a lot of sides to this story. I don't mind actually. I think let's finish it and do other policies to stop the global warming. Right, okay. So there is in Germany, after the reunification, there was a tax instituted to basically help the development of East Germany. And this is what this question is about. This tax, should it be completely abolished, or should no one pay it basically anymore? So basically, I think what the sites are is like, people are like, okay, this development it's over now. It's been 30 years. We should stop this. Like less taxes. That's especially like the Liberal Democrat equivalent. They're like, no, we shouldn't pay any more of these taxes. And then I would say the other side is probably like, well, this money is still kind of necessary. If you look at the difference between East Germany and West Germany, it's very stark. West Germany is much more well off, and there's probably a bunch of reasons for that. There definitely has been a bit of a drain of people going to West Germany, which had more opportunities and still has a lot more opportunities. There was a lot of like things where West German companies kind of like took East German value, like capital and things like that. That was obviously in state hand before in East Germany, and kind of like capitalized on that, and that obviously led to a lot of asymmetrical kind of development. So basically, I think like a lot of people would, I guess it is a bit of a West-East divide. Like if you're kind of West German, you're probably like, well, why should we even continue? That's like, it's not necessary. It's been 30 years. It's fine now. And maybe more in East Germany, it's like, well, the money is more necessary still in some ways. And I would probably actually agree that because have been a lot of things that have gone pretty badly, and there is like a real difference in terms of standards, that we probably should just continue it, and we should like maybe use this money more effectively also. Of course, that is easy to say and hard to really implement, but I'm not necessarily for completely scrapping this. I think generally like there should be much more structural investment in Germany. Our infrastructure has been going pretty badly in a lot of ways, and that's both in West and East Germany. But yeah, so I'm not for that. Okay, so here's the question is, so this is mostly about like officers of the law, I guess, mostly, or like people employed by the state. Bureaucrats is what it says, but usually what they mean is probably like front-facing kind of bureaucrats. But anyway, so the question is, should these kind of people, so police officers, bureaucrats, that kind of thing, be allowed to wear the hijab while working on the job? And I mean, yeah, well, obviously they should be. And like there's people who are against it, who are saying like, no, there should be a separation of church and state, or like people are like, no, I hate Muslims, right? Like that's the underlying thing for a lot of this, and like I don't like to see this doesn't belong to Germany, something like that. But no, obviously like people like the hijab is not like, I mean, should I open that kind of worms, right? Like, because there's obviously a lot of question about like, is it forced? Is it not forced? At times, both of this can exist, and man, that is a really big topic. Okay, anyways, I think the people who want to wear a hijab, even in official positions, should be allowed to do that. That's like their personal choice, and I don't think that them wearing that, or for example someone wearing a cross or something like that, something like a Christian symbol, or something like that, should not be allowed in an official duty. I think it's perfectly fine to wear a hijab. I think that's perfectly fine everywhere, right? I'm really against those kind of bans. I think they're mostly based on like fear-mongering against Muslims, which I think is inappropriate. So I think it should be allowed. Okay, should cars with internal combustion engines be allowed to be registered for a long time? That's the question. So the question, why is that a question? Because people are talking about, well, we need to ban these cars. Basically, they're emitting a lot of CO2. It's not good for, it's not good for the environment. Basically, that's the point. And then, so I guess in broad terms, there's on the one hand there's the environmentalism, and on the other hand there's like people who are like more business focused for German business, and the belief that the internal combustion engine is one of the great advantages that Germany has in its car manufacturing, that they are very, very good, very advanced, and that's one of the reasons why we can sell so many cars. And there's a lot of people who are like, well, maybe we can also change it to hydrogen in the future, so we shouldn't be so much against it. We should definitely make no rules about going out of it. And it's funny, right? Because it's actually the same thing is happening in Japan. The CEO of Toyota basically just said the same thing, where it's like, it should be, the problem is global warming. It's not the internal combustion engine or whatever, but like they're very closely linked, right? Like the internal combustion engine is the reason why one of the main reasons why CO2 is emitted into the atmosphere. So I think this is also like a philosophical difference, right? Like a lot of people think like, we'll just have technology develop and then it'll be good. So once the technology is ready, but really something like rules and regulations gives like timeframes and incentives to actually develop technology. So for example, if you do say by 2025 or whatever, we don't, that's I think like a pretty early one. I don't know. Some people might be like 2030, I don't know. But say like 2025, we do not allow internal combustion engines to be registered anymore, but would still mean like everyone who has their car can use them for now, definitely. You'd see what rules will develop later, but they can, like, say you register it in like 2024, you can still probably drive it for 10 years or whatever, right? But it gives a huge incentive to someone like BMW, to a company like Mercedes or whatever, also Toyota here in Japan, to be like, okay, so what's the alternative? Let's really pour money in electric. Let's pour way more money in hydrogen. Maybe try to build out an infrastructure for hydrogen pumps or like for electric charging to make this much easier to really aid this transition. So if there is like a pressure, that's when people are really creative and decide to do things, right? Like if they have like a deadline, then these companies actually have to do something to save the bottom line. And that's one thing that like I feel like a lot of like free market advocates don't really understand about how the markets actually work. That they are never free. They always have like a lot of incentive structures, and they're interacting with both regulations and with societal expectations. And this kind of changing these things is incredibly important to get to beneficial outcomes within a market. I wanted to talk about this before, so maybe I'm making up that kind of forms. But basically, what I think like markets are pretty good at is to find like local minima. So if you think about like improvements, okay. So like say you have this is the level you're at right now, right? Now you have a market, and it's basically a machine that can like sometimes find better things to do. Let's just assume that like this is more complicated, but it's sort of the model that like people who advocate for free markets are thinking about. So okay, you're at this level, right? Like now you have the free market, and it goes down and down. Down is better in this case, so it goes down. Okay, so the thing is with markets is that they can find like a local optimal. Yeah, so this is down here, but like if it would have to go up and then there's a way lower down here, right? It might never reach this because it won't go back up again, right? But what you can do basically is you can lift it up through regulation. Be like, okay, let's go here, like the worst situation, and then it goes further down. So that's basically a way, in my opinion, to think about markets and to see how to make them actually better for everyone involved. And that can sometimes that takes a bit of a long-term thinking, and it's not in the logic of businesses, because they have to look at usually much more at short-term returns. It wouldn't necessarily have to be that way. You could somewhat change this kind of system, for example, but something like what Japan did, what South Korea did, but also what America and England did when I say America, I mean the United States of America. I need to catch myself there. But also what the United States of America and England did when they first developed, which is basically to protect their own businesses, even though like they might not be able to compete on an even level right now. It's sensible to protect them over a longer period so they can build up their power, build up their strength. And then once they actually are strong, then like suddenly it's like, actually free markets are great, because free markets are great for the people who already have a lot of money and power. And that's obviously why America, and that's obviously why the United States and England were huge free market champions, and why it's not so good for developing countries, because they actually basically get taken advantage of, and are sort of like paying. Well, I mean, depending on how you want to phrase it, like they're kind of developing the developed countries. Yeah, there's a wealth transfer from like the poor countries, especially when they're resource rich, to the rich countries. Or you could see it as a tribute if you want to look at America if you want to look at the United States as basically an empire, which is not that far from the truth. If you look where their military bases are, like it's very similar to the Roman Empire in some ways, even though the way that they administer it is obviously different. But yeah, anyway, so I agree. It should. No, I disagree. The internal combustion engine needs to go probably sooner than later. It's just, I think it's just better for European, for German development as well, right? Like I think like we will be better off if we do this earlier and try to bring these changes about in a sensible way to our industry, so we can continue to have a very robust industry into the future, when other countries will be like, no, we're not getting internal combustion engines anymore. Anyways, next question. School politics should be more strongly... How do you hang on? I guess it's sort of like, education policy should be done more strongly on the federal level. So what do you need to know for this? In Germany, we have a federal system, and education policy is basically assigned to the states. So each state can, within certain reason, within certain limits, can make their own education policy, and that leads to very different policies from each state. So, for example, there's different value put on different high school diplomas depending on the state. Like some say, like this is much more difficult, this is much less difficult. And now the question is like, should these differences in states be changed by having education policy on a federal level? And I don't have a strong opinion about that one, actually. I mean, I do think there's like a lot wrong with education, not just in Germany, but everywhere. But I'm not sure that it could be solved through the federal power. I mean, like, obviously, like, doing something federally is always kind of easier because it's just one thing you have to change. But I do think there is also somewhat of a positive power if there's more... There's somewhat of a positive aspect if there is more power locally. And I don't know if like the state level is the best one. It should probably be even more local, like maybe communal level, or like, city level. Things like that should have more power. I guess I'm neutral about that one. The federal government should subsidize projects for fighting anti-Semitism more strongly. Right. So okay, so here's the thing. I mean, I agree, right? Like, but it kind of does depend on the project for what do you consider anti-Semitism? Because there is a bit of a problem in Germany where a lot of censorship is going on for like artists and people who have spoken out for BDS, right? Boycott, Divest and Sanctions, which is a Palestinian movement to basically put economic pressure on Israel to treat the Palestinian people that are under their direct power, like Israel controls Palestine completely, in a more humane way, like obviously not bombing them, but also like not shutting off the power, not shutting off water, basically giving her equal rights. There's a couple of things that you have to talk about in that sense, and I think so. My problem when reading this question is that I agree with the sentiment, but I feel it sounds a bit like a dog whistle in the sense of that basically like Muslims are played out against Jews, right? And I think that's not right. So what if they mean, because there is a huge anti-Semitism problem in Germany, particularly from the right, like mostly overwhelmingly from the right, and there is some like anti-Semitism certainly from the left too, but I think it is from a different quality. Oh man, this is a very difficult one to say. So I think so yeah, basically I would say yes, but it shouldn't, for example, be used to censor people who speak out against Israel. That's I guess like my main worry here. I think the problem is in the UK and also the US and also in Germany, basically there has been a concerted campaign to associate left-wing politics with anti-Semitism. That's why I'm very much struggling with this question, because I am very much against anti-Semitism, and I don't like. I think it is a huge problem in all of these three countries that I mentioned. It even has increased over the last years, and I do think that there is a kernel of truth that there are people that associate Israel with all Jewish people, which is wrong and not right to do. And also, like, it shouldn't be on Jewish people to have to talk about Israel or anything. Like, that's not a connection that's necessary. But at the same time, I do think this concerted effort, which has been really problematic. You can especially see it with like Corbyn, who's been basically smeared as an anti-Semite, which he clearly is not. He's just not an anti-Semite. And it was a concerted effort by the media to basically attack him. And left-wing politics. And it's the same kind of in Germany. It's also used to brush people who basically just say like, well, we shouldn't deliver arms that are killing Palestinian children or something like that to Israel. It's like, well, so you're an anti-Semite. And so the problem I see is like that obviously this jump does exist, right? Like people do start to associate like their opposition to Israel to anti-Semitism, and possibly they will do also bad things about that. Although I think by focusing on this, we're really ignoring that the vast majority is like right-wing Nazi violence against Jewish people. And so I do think we should do way more against it. It should just not be used as a political. Okay, it could just be misused. And like in the same token, I do think we also need to do much more against Islamophobia, which is a huge problem in my opinion in Germany as well. It's a very simple question that has a lot of implications in my opinion. So I mean, I guess I made my points and problems why I think this is a problem. I guess in a nutshell again, like I think in Germany there is a big problem where the anti-Semitism, like the fighting anti-Semitism, is used to silence people who aren't anti-Semitic, and that is a big problem. But I do agree that we should fund more projects into anti-Semitism. So I agree. Chinese, what is this? Chinese companies should not get contracts for the development of communication infrastructure in Germany. This is also similar in the EU. Like, this is particularly about Huawei, which is spelled Huawei. I think it's pronounced Huawei. Don't speak Chinese. And so this is like, there comes a lot of pressure from the United States, who obviously don't want China to have much power. And then there's like a bit of scaremongering in the sense that, well, if it was Huawei, then like the Chinese Communist Party could, because they have the absolute power, just ask them to give us all the communication that we have in Germany. They can just open this up. Of course, that's a bit simplistic. That's not exactly how it works. And then on the other hand, we know, especially in Germany, we know that the NSA did spy on Angela Merkel. So they literally spied on our chancellor, which is like an incredibly hostile act, and it's just basically ignored. But we're making this kind of not known spying of China, which, I mean, of course they do spying. They do espionage. Yeah, they do espionage, and because everyone does, right? But we like, what's the alternative now in that sense? Like, you know, if it's like the United States of America, should the United States not get any more contracts, right? Like, because what if they compel like Google to give up everything, which they also can. They do have that power as well. Like, you know, maybe we trust a bit more in the institution of the United States, although like historically they're very bad at this as well. So that's difficult. So I personally don't think that we should like support US companies or Chinese companies. I think US companies have way more influence, and they're skirting our tax laws. It's a big problem that we have in Europe, and China could be a similar problem, but it's not to that same degree at all. So if I take this question, what I think, because I'm a little bit of a nationalist in terms of economics, is like, I think Germany and the EU should invest in its own infrastructures, right? So basically what I think is that you could say, like, for having our communication infrastructure, we should invest in European companies. And I think like one of the only ones that really have the know-how right now is maybe Nokia still, but that might be more expensive, maybe not as good. It's hard to say. I mean, obviously I don't know really. I have only read a couple articles about this, and so I have to go on that. But I think it makes a lot of sense to try to develop this know-how within Europe. And I think that's just basically the solution. And if it costs a little bit more, you have to think about this as money very well invested into European companies, into European people who will get skills that are very useful, very, very necessary, and we should really try to do that. So I'm actually for that, but the problem then becomes much more of a legal one, where where the question is like, well, can you really discriminate companies, or will there like be backlash? You know, like maybe the US does that before. And an interesting example is that like police force used to always have German cars. And I think that has been a bit of a discussion, especially now, like where all these free trade agreements are in the EU as well, right? Like there's other car makers, so they're like, well, we should have equal access to this potential contract. And I don't know. I mean, it has some good and some bad. I think like the problem is that a lot of these laws are designed in a way that they basically benefit corporations over people. I don't think that's good, right? Like I think that the kind of this rule of law and the understanding of that contracts will be kept is important to the degree that it doesn't hurt your citizens. Like when it starts to become a problem in that sense, that like, you know, money is just funneled away, then it starts to become a big problem. And yeah, so I guess that's my opinion on this one. I guess I'm going to say neutral, because I on the one hand have this kind of thing where I don't think like China should be should be punished over the United States, but at the same time I think maybe Europe should just generally say like, no, we just do it as internally.